Hello you guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name's Rebecca. If you haven't been here before, welcome. So today's video is another deep dive into Hulu's Only Murders in the Building, and this episode is called Ghost Light. But before we get into it, if you have not watched Season 3, Episode 6 of Hulu's Only Murders in the Building, then do not watch this video. We are going to deep dive, look at the clues, come up with some theories, so there are definitely going to be some spoilers in here, but fear not, because I have videos for every episode of this season, last season, and a sprinkling of episodes from Season 1, so if you want to go check those out first, definitely do. Some of the clues actually connect and come all the way through. And if you are not subscribed to my channel yet, please hit the subscribe button down below, like, comment, hit the bell notification, all those YouTube-y things. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of this season, and that means we've got 4 more episodes after this, so I need your guys' help to hit that 1,000 mark, and then YouTube might possibly pay me for making these videos, and that would be pretty cool. So let's get into the video. So we're doing episode 6, Ghost Light. So first things first, Howard is the narrator of this episode, and he is talking about the Gooseberry Theater, which is where they're having the performance of Death Rattle Dazzle. And he talks about Gideon Gooseberry, who was an upcoming star on the Great White Way. He died on stage in the theater and is thought to haunt the theater and haunt any cast that comes in and performs there. He was hit in the head by a sandbag. So he apparently haunted the company of Hamlet in 1949. Now we know that this show has mentioned Shakespeare plays a lot, so here's another mention of Hamlet. He also mentions a play called Iceman Comet's Revival, and I did want to talk about this because this does, sometimes it seems kind of random, but this does have a couple of touch points that kind of fall back to our show of Only Murders. So basically this show is about a bar full of people who are kind of drinking endlessly. They have dreams and aspirations, but they're never really going to get there because they're not doing anything to get them there. And one day this guy who they all know comes in and says hey, I stopped drinking and now my life is going so much better. And so a lot of the people kind of try this, only to find out in the end that this guy's kind of a crook. One character admits to being the informant that sent his mother to jail. And I think that this possibly relates back to Hulu's Only Murders, because he says at first that he did it because he believes in the law of the land, but then he really admits that he did it because he hated her for her will and desire to live freely. And so in the end, this character ends up, his name's Parrot, ends up jumping off the fire escape because he realizes that he turned his mother in not for the greater good, but because he hated her for this desire to live freely. And so I thought that this might reflect back to our cast, because if you've watched my other videos, you know I have a theory that Dickie and Loretta are related, that Loretta is Dickie's mother and that she gave Dickie up at birth. So is it possible that this is making a reference to Dickie possibly trying to make Loretta look guilty for the murder of Ben Glenroy? Does he hate her for giving her up at birth? And we'll talk more about this in the theories section of the video. We also look at this note in Loretta's notebook that Oliver found, the one that has all these articles of Ben Glenroy with Dickie standing behind him. And it says first preview October 13th, 2006. And then it says for comps, Marlon, Lori, Nancy, Faisal, Opal, Nova, and Betsy. So I'm not 100% sure if that has any meaning to the show itself, but Oliver is using it to compare this handwriting to Loretta's handwriting. He remembers that somebody wrote fucking pig in Ben Glenroy's dressing room and decides to take the letter with him so that he can see whether the handwriting lines up. Howard bangs on Mabel's door and says that there's something that he needs to admit to her, and he says that he killed Ben Glenroy. And immediately Mabel's like, what? So Howard confesses, and so he basically goes on this whole diatribe about how he didn't sweep the stage the night that the show was going to begin, and he had swept the stage every other night, and he believed that this would stop Gideon Gooseberry from coming and cursing their show. And the one night that he didn't sweep, what happened? Ben dies. So he comes to admit that it's his fault that Ben has died because he didn't get a chance to sweep the stage. Howard says that Katie's office was locked and that's where he usually got the broom from, and that that's the reason that he didn't sweep. And he says that ever since he has been sweeping the stage since the show is going to start back up again, and he saw the ghost of Gideon Gooseberry, and that's why he's decided to confess. We kind of flash over to Howard sweeping the stage, and we see this figure with a red coat and a cap, and he stood by the door. And we remember that Dr. C in the last episode was also wearing a red coat and a cap, so we're wondering, is this Dr. C or is it somebody else? And Howard admits to saying, "Are you the ghost of Gideon Gooseberry?" And the person says, "Sure." Ha. That was my scariest evil laugh. During Howard's kind of like diatribe, Talbot comes out of the other room because he stayed over at Mabel's, and he says that he believes ghosts are real because he did a documentary on the Queen Mary and the woman in white who apparently haunts the ship. And as we deducted, Talbot and Mabel say that this man in a cap and a red coat sounds a lot like Dr. C, and theorizes that maybe once they saw Mabel and Talbot at the club, they rushed over to the theater to get rid of whatever evidence was still existing in there and try and cover their tracks. We also see that Charles is sad and a little bit all over the place, and Oliver definitely has this suspicion that Loretta is the murderer, but he's kind of warring within himself whether he wants to tell the trio or keep it to himself. We know that he really likes her, so he's not sure if he should protect her or not. He decides to try and investigate the whole situation alone and says that he'll placate Howard and go down to the theater to look into things, but Mabel and Charles insist on coming with. Of course they do. It's their little trio podcast, and so Oliver doesn't get the chance to go into the theater alone. Then Howard screams at the two and says, like, "Let's go, Jack, Janet, and Chrissy," which is apparently a Three's Company reference, and Howard is losing his absolute marbles over this. And I just thought that this was an interesting reference because Three is Company is about three people who are like a little platonic trio who live together. And so I was like, could Mabel move in with Charles or Oliver? Like, is it possible that they're gonna move in together? Because we know she's on the hunt for a new apartment. We know she hasn't found anything yet. We know she can't afford very much. So it would be really cool if she got to stay in the Arconia by becoming a roommate of one of the guys. So we end up in the theater. We've got the trio, we've got Howard, and we've got President McKinley, because Charles says that this fish is basically all he has left in his life, which is sad. And we watch Charles almost get hit by two different sandbags on the stage, and this is reminiscent of the way that Gideon Gooseberry died or was rumored to have died, so this is very suspicious. We also get a look at a signed wall at the Gooseberry Theater, and so I just wanted to take a moment to screenshot it and point a couple of things out. So one thing that we see on the wall is a rattle for Death Rattle Dazzle. This was probably signed by the cast at some point. We also see the word cookie and I can circle it, but I just thought that that was interesting because we do have this theory that the person who was in Ben's dressing room was actually a plate of cookies and that they were possibly poisoned. And we also have a crown, and we know we have a lot of talk of Hamlet and murder and brotherly angst, I guess, brothers who want to murder each other. So I just thought that this was interesting that they also have a literal crown painted or drawn on the wall. So those are just some interesting things. So they all go down to KT's office to talk to her, and we immediately see in her office that she has a poster of Richard II on her wall. And so this is another Shakespeare play. It's really all about overthrowing the indecisive king Richard II and how Henry IV ends up taking over and like ruling after that. So there's nothing like directly related to Only Murders, but I did see someone say that Dickie is possibly a short version of Richard. We know that if your name is Richard, you could also be called Dick, Rich, Dickie. So I think that that is a really great idea. And just to call them out, so I saw at Christy N. Kane 9087 on YouTube. You commented on my last video, and you said that Dickie possibly would equal Richard, and is it possible that they're telling us with these posters for Richard II, the murderer is Dickie? I thought that was really cool, so thanks for the comment. The other thing that we get a really good look at is KT is highlighting something, and when Howard comes in all like yelling and screaming, she ends up shredding this document and saying, "Howard, you messed up my highlighting." So I just wanted to take a closer look at it. And basically it says Act 1 in black. I think it says the sounds of the seaside, spotlight out on the detective walking downstage to us. He wears an overcoat, loose winter scarf, and then we have Ben's monologue, "What turned me into a creature of the night? Let me tell you, I just finished up a case in Halifax when I got a call about some curious goings-on at the old Pickwick Lighthouse. I made my way to see for myself." He starts to move upstage. Then, but here's the thing, "I had no idea that I would leave that blasted rock more dead than alive." Then it says, "At the base of the lighthouse, a shelter door opens with a creak. The nanny." Then Loretta says, "Who goes there?" And the detective, continues and says something else. But I just thought it was interesting that she highlighted sounds of the seaside, the detective making his way downstage to us, and then highlighted at the base of the lighthouse. So I don't know if any of these highlights have anything specific to do, but I also think it's weird that she shredded the paper rather than just recycling it or throwing it away as if it was some kind of important document. So we continue on. The trio's all in KT's office. Howard is absolutely losing it, and they let KT know that multiple sandbags have fallen on stage and almost killed Charles. So she says that she is going to go out there and make sure that everything is safe and okay, and she asks them to stay off the stage for the time being. And Oliver offers up Howard as the person to go and help KT and make sure that the knots are all tied securely. Mabel finds a sign-in sheet and says that they could compare the handwriting of all the cast members to the handwriting of fucking Pig in Ben's dressing room. And Oliver gets really weird about this. He's like, that kind of thing is silly, and she's like, this is the kind of idea that you have all the time. And he takes the sign-in sheet and he's like, well, then I'm gonna do it, basically. And he walks away and runs to Ben's dressing room to compare the note that he had from Loretta's notebook to fucking Pig. And we do notice that the F in, her notes really does look like the F from fucking Pig, but we also can see an N. And the way she writes her capital N, I believe the name on the sheet is Nancy, does not look like the capital N of fucking Pig on the board. So if we're comparing letter for letter, it doesn't look like Loretta would have written this note. It doesn't look like her handwriting. So right as Oliver is trying to compare the handwriting, we kind of see him decide that he is going to tell Mabel and Charles what's going on. He thinks that the two F's look really similar, so he kind of walks out and starts calling their name, only to turn around and walk up the stairs behind the theater stage, and we hear this like electric buzzing noise and this attic space, and we realize that it's the attic of the Gooseberry. Oliver is kind of looking around, and all of a sudden we have someone cover his mouth, and we're like, oh my god, who is that? And it flashes away to Charles, I believe. And the other thing is we see a black hat and a red coat. So we're like, oh, this is the person who Howard thought was the ghost of Gideon Gooseberry, and this person has just covered Oliver's mouth and trapped him in the attic. So now we move to Charles, who has accidentally locked himself in a closet while on a mission to find President McKinley, this fish, some extra water. He ends up putting him in the toilet, and we basically leave them there. And we learn that Jerry Blau is the person who covered Oliver's mouth. He is a fellow director who was apparently fired off of the play about a year ago and has been living in the attic since he seems to have had some sort of tiff with his partner or roommate. Mabel is kind of hunting on her own. She's pretty annoyed at the guys for just disappearing off on their way, and she's like, I'm the only one who's actually doing any detective work around here. But she runs into Taubert at the theater, and he claims that he was tailing Jonathan and that he was led right to the theater. We then flash back to KT and Howard, and KT lets Howard know that she never locks her door, and so she was not the one who locked it the night of the show. And Howard is pretty confused why he wasn't able to get to the broom then. But also they're just kind of having deep talks, and Howard says that this is the closest he's ever gotten to his dream job, and that he's fucked it up, and he admits that he has always wanted to be an actor, and KT admits that she's always wanted to be a director. So they kind of have this little thing in common, which is really sweet. Meanwhile, we have Charles having a mental breakdown. He accidentally flushes the fish away because he uses the toilet in the closet, and he flushes it, and the fish was in there, and somehow, though, the fish is fine. We go back to Oliver and Jerry says that Loretta had a violent temper, and he says that he'll tell Oliver what happened on the opening night of the play, because apparently he was there when Ben and Loretta had their little spat. Flashback to Mabel and Taubert, who are now sleuthing together, and we find Jonathan in the hallway. They run into him, and they catch him with basically a bag of pills, which we can assume comes from Dr. C. So Jonathan goes on to say that he's been taking the leading man cocktail, and it was what Ben was taking for anxiety. And it includes beta blockers, which block adrenaline and cause the heart to beat more slowly, Propecia, which is for hair loss, HGH, which is human growth hormone, which can be used for height and muscle regulation, and a little bit of meth. So we know that these things were all in Ben's system, and it's possible that these things interacted in a negative way and caused his reaction on stage when he died. We also know that nothing came up in the tox report for the police, so it's really peculiar that Ben was literally taking meth and that didn't come up. So is this another situation like the Tim Kono situation where someone suppressed the results of the toxicology report? Is someone in the police covering up these crimes? So Jonathan goes on to say that he never wanted to be the lead, but that he kind of did it because Howard has always wanted to do it, and it's always been Howard's dream to be an actor. So he felt this pressure to be the lead. So the main motive for Jonathan to be the murderer has kind of been taken away because he never really wanted to be the lead. But that does give us motive for Howard to be the murderer, because if Howard couldn't be the actor himself, maybe he killed so that Jonathan could be on stage. So back to Jerry talking to Oliver. He says that he saw Loretta and Ben fighting while they were on the steps of the lighthouse rehearsing, and he heard Ben say something that must have set Loretta off, and she called Ben a fucking pig, and they started to like squabble and like physically fight. Jerry said that he then saw Charles punch Ben in the face, and this is the first time that Oliver is hearing about this, because the only person who knows that Charles punched Ben in the face was Ben and Joy. So now it's coming out that Charles hit Ben in the face. That's why he needed the red mark covered. We learned this last episode, but this is the first that Oliver is hearing of it. We're back on the stage with KT and Howard is performing and inviting Gideon Gooseberry down to the stage to complete his performance so that he will no longer haunt the theater while they are performing. And so KT is directing Howard through this. Howard is calling Gideon down. KT says, "Sing out loud, Louise." And this is actually a reference to a movie called Gypsy, about a stage mom who pushes her two daughters into the acting industry, and Louise is the less successful daughter, but her other sister actually quits and decides not to go into acting anymore, and Louise ends up being a burlesque dancer and transforming herself into Gypsy Rose. But I thought that this was interesting because we have this dynamic of siblings in the industry. One is more talented than the other. Could this possibly be a reflection of Ben and Dickie? Was Dickie ever in the industry? Was he ever an actor alongside Ben? Was he worse than Ben? Was he better than Ben and he thought that Ben stole his spotlight? I think that these are some interesting questions in a way that this reference could reflect within Only Murders. So we've got Howard calling down the ghost of Gideon. Charles is still locked in a closet. We see him finally figure out how to get his way out with his Jimmy keys. President McKinley is somehow still alive, so he brings the fish with him. We go back to Oliver and Jerry says to Oliver that the only wrong choice is no choice. Indecision is death. And this is apparently what Oliver said to Jerry a long time ago. And so Jerry tells Oliver to choose what matters to him and then protect it no matter what. So this is kind of the time when we see Oliver really click into gear that, like, even if Loretta's the murderer, he's decided that she's what's important to him and he's not going to turn on her. He's not going to tell the trio about his suspicions. And this kind of creates this tense moment between the trio where they're all fighting, they're all upset, they're all insulting each other. Charles decides to quit the show. Oliver sabotages the case by wiping down the mirror that said fucking pig so they can't compare the letters anymore. Then Oliver yells at Mabel and tells her that she's never basically had a real job and so that she should stop trying to mess with his. And she storms out and says that Cinda was right and that she should have partnered with her instead of staying with these two old guys. You know, this is kind of the end of the episode. We've got the trio not trioing right now. We've got Howard having his little moment in the spotlight on stage, KT having her little moment directing, and we've got one less murderer, so Jonathan doesn't seem like he would be the murderer. But we've got one more when we have suspicion set on Howard. And Howard's last lines for the show say, "Sometimes all you need to banish your ghosts is for someone to see you and understand your dreams. It's only when you're alone that the real haunting begins." And we see kind of the last shot is the dolls that Jerry was using to basically show what Loretta and Ben were doing. We see those three dolls. It's Ben, Loretta, and Charles upside down, dumped in this box, and it kind of looks like they've fallen from a great height and have just been like splatted on the stage. So I think that was kind of like a little bit of a scary foreshadowing. So anyway, that is the synopsis, the summary of this episode. But now it's time to talk about the theories, which is the best part. So the first theory I have is just kind of a continuation of the theory that we had last week, which is that Loretta is Dickie's mother, Dickie is Loretta's son. He was given up at birth and was adopted by Ben Glenroy's mom, and so that's how they are brothers. But I think it's possible that Dickie either found out that Loretta was his mother, or Loretta told Dickie that she was his mother. Maybe she apologized to him, said she was sorry for giving him up. It's possible that she got pregnant with him in the midst of her trying to become this actress and thought that having a child would keep her from following her dreams. And so she gave the child up, maybe to someone close to her, like her sister or brother, because we know she's Aunt Loretta, or maybe to a complete stranger. But either way, Dickie is Loretta's son. So one of my theories is that it's possible that Dickie and Loretta somehow combined murdered Ben in order to protect each other. But after listening to this episode, I have a new theory that it's possible that once Dickie found out that Loretta was his mother, and that she had given him up, he decided that this was a form of abandonment, that he had to live with Ben all these years, kind of being the second best, and he was angry that he was never number one and that his mom had given him up. So in an effort to get revenge on Loretta, he murdered Ben and tried to frame her for his murder. So he knew Ben better than almost anybody else. He, maybe poisoned him with the cookies and then pushed him down the elevator shaft, and he knew that Loretta had yelled fucking pig on stage because she'd done it. Maybe he heard her do it, and so he's been framing her ever since as a form of revenge for her decision to give him up at birth and to pursue her acting career. And we know that Loretta has felt guilty about this because she says that she deserves to be cursed or deserves to be unlucky. She said that in the last episode. And so it's possible that Dickie knows that Loretta will take the fall no matter what, especially if he looks guilty. And so he's framing her because he hates her for what she did, and he hates Ben for always being the center of attention. So I think that theory is definitely possible, and it would be a twist if we saw Loretta take the fall for Dickie's murder of Ben, only for it to be discovered that it was really Dickie, and for him to tell her that he hates her and that he never loved her and that he was doing it just for revenge, because I could see that happening, like us thinking that they're the loving mother-son relationship, only to see that Dickie was trying to fool Loretta this whole time. I think that the only other two people who could possibly be the murderers this season are Howard and Taubert. I think that there's not enough buildup around either of these characters to make the theories as strong as the Dickie theory is, but Howard's motives could possibly be that he never got to fulfill his acting dreams, and it was murdering Ben to get Jonathan onto the stage and into the limelight to secondhand fulfill his desires. And for Taubert, it's possible that he murdered Ben because he didn't want to be, you know, documenting Ben's life and his movie. He wanted something more for himself, and to basically watch Ben be murdered in live time and then to quote unquote solve the murder would probably make Taubert pretty famous as a director or as a videographer. So it's possible that he killed Ben to make his movie this like renowned thing, and that he knew that it would launch him into the stratosphere, that he would become famous for it. But I still think that the most likely theory is that Dickie is the murderer, or some combination of Loretta and Dickie, although at this point it seems like Loretta would be too obvious of a choice to be the murderer, since they basically said that she's the one who wrote fucking Pig. And I think that it's pretty likely that Ben and Loretta were fighting because of Dickie, because maybe Ben found out that Loretta is Dickie's mom. She was trying to get him out of this situation. Ben was angry about it, and so they physically fought. But I do think this twist, this idea of like Dickie was actually playing Ben and Loretta. He wanted Ben dead so that he didn't have to be in the shadows of his brother anymore, and he wanted Loretta to go down for the murder as revenge for giving him up as a child. And I think that would probably be a really interesting storyline. So I'm excited to see where the rest of this season goes. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, make sure to comment below who you think the murderer is. Feel free to message me on Instagram. I love to talk to you guys about your theories. And yeah, make sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell notification, all those YouTube things. Like I said before, I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers, and it would mean the absolute world to me if you would hit that subscribe button and send the video to a friend who also likes Only Murders. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all next week for another episode of Hulu's Only Murders in the Building. Bye guys.